Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Dictember. This is an inaugural BookTube event created by Mark at Book Time with Elvis. I'm one of the hosts, along with Michael K. Vaughan and Sean Stanfast, and we are reading private eye fiction, House Dick fiction, for the month of September, which is rapidly coming to a close, despite today's warmth and pleasant temperatures. And I've been having a blast. Dictember, for me, has been a complete success. I've been having a blast just finding new books, finding older authors whose back catalog I had not read. It's been wonderful. And yesterday's video, I talked about the first Anna Pigeon novel by Nevada Barr, Track of the Cat. And I enjoyed it. I liked it sort of so-so when I read it, 150 years ago. And then this was the first time that I reread it, and I enjoyed it. I've read a lot of mystery novels, a lot of private eye novels have gone under the bridge since I read Track of the Cat the first time. I was wondering how that would affect my reading, and I think it probably did in retrospect. I think that a private eye writer probably has to be a lot more energetic than that first book was, and I raised the question in that video of whether or not Anna Pigeon even counts for Dictember. She's a park ranger. She solves crimes, but they're in a more or less official capacity. And a number of you emailed me and said two things cropped up over and over again. One was that I shouldn't judge the rest of the series by that first book, that it gets better. And the second, you were all universal, that she doesn't count for Dictember. So, last night, I went back and reread the first installment in another crime series, again to see if it would do any more for me than it did the first time. I read it 50 years ago or whatever when it first came out and thought it was kind of by the numbers. Now, I would expect that all the reading that I've done since then would have two possible effects. One is that I would be so accustomed now, I am so much more familiar with the standard gimmicks and cliches of private eye fiction that if that's all you do, it's not going to be enough for me. And second, I'd like to think that in that entire time I have grown more perceptive as a reader, so that if you're doing something a little subtle, I might detect it. I might detect it in a better way than I did the first time. So last night I went back and read Indemnity Only by Sarah Paretsky. This is the first V.I. Warshawski novel that came out, I don't even know, 40 years ago, something like that. And it's the story of a private eye. This time I got it absolutely right. There is no doubt that V.I. Warshawski is a private eye. There is no doubt of that at all. And she takes a case. She's in Chicago. She takes a case where a wealthy banker wants her to investigate the disappearance of his son's girlfriend. And she has, set rates, and she makes a living doing this. She takes the case. It's very often the case that V.I. Warshawski, I remembered, because I haven't read all the books in the series. I read this book, and then I let a lot of them go by. I read a later one, a much later one, and noticed something of the same thing in both of them, which is that there's sometimes not a lot of confluence between the private investigating work that she does for a living and the cases that are dramatic, the cases that end up being the plots of the novels. Which is, I think, probably Sarah Paretsky's way of admitting what we have hinted at on this series a few times over the course of the month, which is that ordinary private eye work is boring. It pays the bills in the days before the internet, but it was pretty boring. I think that modern private eye writers have compensated for that fact in the worst possible way. Usually by upping the personal stakes with the private eye to ridiculous levels. So in some ongoing private eye series, the private eye has been himself or herself mutilated physically, tortured many times. They've lost one and maybe even two spouses to bad guys. They've lost all their friends. That gets ridiculous. That is just absurd. That's one way that you can do it. And another way is to do it the way Sarah Paretsky did it right from the beginning, which is to have them be two separate things. Where there are cases that are normal, where you have a day job, so to speak. But in the course of investigating, V.I. Warshawski takes the case, and in the course of doing even initial investigations of the case, she realizes that the man is not who he says he is. He's not a wealthy banker, and that the missing woman may or may not be the girlfriend of his son, but the son ends up dead. So there's a whole nother can of worms that opens up, and it's very well done. It highlights the kind of thing that is my greatest weakness when it comes to, for instance, trying to write a murder mystery of my own, which is intricacy of plotting. I understand now when some mystery authors over the decades, when they're interviewed, have said that it sometimes takes them longer to plot a book than it does to write one. I understand that could be true. There's all sorts of things that you have to do in a well-constructed murder mystery series or an individual novel, which this one is. This is well-constructed. I liked it a lot more than the first time I read it. Maybe that's just because I know how much better these books get as they go along. I've read a few in the later in the series, and this author really knows what she's doing. But I don't think so. I think it's that you get the little bean right in between me and the book. I think it's that this is really well done in a way that I don't think I'm able to do yet. I think I could devote a month of Sundays to plotting something like this, and I couldn't do it because you've got to have the surface plot, the secondary plot, the real plot, the thing that turns out to be real, even though it doesn't look that way on the surface. You've got to have a bunch of well-placed red herrings that don't insult your reader's intelligence. All sorts of stuff. Maybe it comes naturally after a while, but my very brief report for Dictember 2022, as it closes out, is that this was a success. I very much enjoyed rereading this, and the only negative side to it, aside from maybe the private eye attitude is laid on a little thick. Authors tend to want their private eyes to have insouciant, rebel without a cause attitude towards all figures in authority, including the people who are paying them, the people who are hiring them. I never had much patience with that, but it isn't too strong in this book. The only real drawback here is that, like with so many books that I've read for Dictember, I want to just dive into the whole catalog. I want to read all of the V.I. Warshawski books, and I'm not going to do that with Sarah Paretsky any more than I did with the last 6 novelists that have made me feel that way. They all have enormous catalogs. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to Pastures Fresh. So that is your book for today, Indemnity Only, the very first V.I. Warshawski novel. Very much liked it. And here's hoping that this streak continues right to the end of Dictember. Thank you, BookTube.